A drifter with no home, no phone, and nothing to lose stumbles into a small town where a journalist's murder is written off as an accident. But when he uncovers the dark secrets buried by the corrupt mayor and his men, he has 24 hours to expose the truth before the killer strikes again. In a battle against time, one man risks everything to bring justice. But will the truth be enough to bring down the powerful forces at play? The clock is ticking and there's nowhere to run. The rain slammed against the dusty streets of Oak Ridge, a town that seemed to have given up on itself long ago. Jack didn't mind the rain. It was familiar, comforting in its own cold way. He had been walking for hours, the weight of his backpack settling comfortably against his shoulders, when he noticed the sign for the town. It was small, worn by years of neglect, but it marked the end of his journey, for now. He didn't have much else to go on. No phone, no home, just the road and whatever it offered. Oak Ridge wasn't much to look at. A handful of buildings, a diner that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years, and a few houses that seemed more abandoned than lived in. The kind of place where people went to disappear, or to hide from something they couldn't outrun. Jack didn't care about the town's history. He was only passing through just like everyone else. As he made his way down the main street, he saw a small crowd gathered outside the diner. Voices murmured, and a few people stood around, talking in low tones. Jack's eyes narrowed. Something was off. The air felt tense, thick with the kind of quiet that came before trouble. He stepped closer, his boots splashing through the rain, and heard the unmistakable voice of Sheriff Daniels. "That's all we got. Looks like an accident. A simple slip and fall," Daniels was saying, his voice a mixture of disbelief and indifference. Jack's curiosity piqued. He edged closer just enough to catch the rest of the conversation. "Accident?" a woman's voice demanded. "My brother was a journalist. He was reporting on the mayor. He wasn't stupid enough to slip on his own damn roof." The crowd murmured again, and Jack caught sight of her. Lena. She was tall, with dark, determined eyes and the kind of face that had seen enough to know when something wasn't right. She was standing next to the sheriff, her fists clenched at her sides. "Ma'am, I'm telling you," Daniel said, his voice hardening, "the investigation is closed." "It was an accident. There's no evidence of foul play. Now, you either accept it, or I'll have to ask you to leave." Lena's eyes flared with anger, but before she could speak, Jack stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low but firm. He wasn't used to speaking in crowds, but something about the way the sheriff had brushed her off irritated him. Daniels turned, his gaze sharp. "What do you want?" Jack didn't hesitate. "I heard what you said. Sounds like you're making a lot of assumptions. Maybe I can help." Lena's eyes flicked to Jack, sizing him up in an instant. She didn't trust him, not yet. She didn't trust anyone. Not after her brother was found dead on that rooftop. Jack took a step closer, his gaze moving to the roof across the street. The wet shingles reflected the flickering streetlights. "I've seen enough to know this wasn't an accident," Jack continued. "You might want to look again. He didn't fall." Lena stepped forward now, her voice shaky but determined. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Jack said, his gaze unwavering, "that someone wanted your brother dead, and they made it look like an accident. But I can't be sure yet. I'd need to see the scene." The sheriff's face twisted in frustration. "This is none of your business, stranger. You're just passing through, aren't you?" Jack didn't respond. He didn't need to. His eyes locked on Lena's, and he saw it, the flicker of hope, the one thing she had left. "You won't find answers here," Daniels warned, his voice edged with a threat. "Not from me. Not from anyone." But Jack wasn't listening. His mind was already calculating, analyzing the angles, the distance, the timing. Everything about this felt wrong. A journalist had been killed for a reason, and he was damn sure that the sheriff wasn't looking for it. "I'll be back in the morning," Jack said to Lena, turning to leave. "And if you want answers, meet me at the diner." Lena hesitated, but then nodded. Her voice was soft but clear. "I'll be there. Don't make promises you can't keep." Jack didn't respond. He didn't need to. As he walked away, the rain continued to fall, steady and unrelenting. And in the back of his mind, Jack knew one thing for sure. The clock was ticking. He had 24 hours to find the truth. After that, Lena would be alone, and the killer would be long gone. He didn't know why he had decided to help. Maybe it was the fire in Lena's eyes, or maybe it was because he'd seen this before, the way people turned a blind eye when power was on the line. But either way, Jack couldn't leave Oak Ridge without answers. He had no phone, no home, and no real reason to stay. But this was personal. The killer had made a mistake. They hadn't counted on Jack being in town. Jack arrived at the diner just before dawn, the neon sign buzzing faintly in the early morning mist. The streets were quieter now, the town still asleep, save for a few early risers and a pair of stray dogs rummaging through a trash can. He pushed open the door, the bell above it jangling as he stepped inside. The smell of burnt coffee and stale grease hit him almost immediately. Lena was already seated at a booth in the back, her face obscured by the papers scattered in front of her. She didn't look up as he approached. Jack slid into the booth across from her, careful not to spill the coffee that had been placed in front of him. "You're late," she said, her voice flat. Jack didn't respond. Instead, he pulled a crumpled notepad from his jacket pocket and set it on the table, flipping it open to a page with a series of notes and scribbles. He could see the uncertainty in Lena's eyes as she glanced at the page. "What's that?" "Things I've seen," Jack said simply. "The crime scene wasn't an accident, Lena. There are too many inconsistencies. Your brother didn't fall off that roof." She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "So you're saying what? Someone pushed him?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Jack said, his voice calm, but every word felt like it carried weight. "The roof isn't the only thing that's off. Look at this." He slid the notepad toward her, pointing at the detailed notes he'd written about the roof's angle, the marks on the shingles, the positioning of the body. Lena scanned the page, then looked up at him, disbelief creeping into her features. "You think someone staged it?" "I'm sure of it. Someone didn't just throw him down there," Jack replied. "The body was too perfectly positioned. He landed like he was meant to." Lena's expression darkened, her jaw tightening. "So you're saying my brother didn't die by accident? He was murdered." Jack nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I'm saying. And I don't think it's random. Someone wanted him dead? But why? Why would anyone want to kill him?" she asked, her voice almost pleading. Jack leaned back in the booth, tapping his fingers on the table. "Your brother wasn't just a journalist. He was digging into something bigger than anyone realized. Something that people don't want getting out. That's why he's dead." Lena's eyes shifted, and for a moment, Jack could see a flicker of fear in them. "The mayor," she whispered. Jack nodded again. "I think your brother was onto something involving the mayor. Something dirty." Lena hesitated before speaking again, her voice low. "I don't know much, but I do know my brother was getting close to something. He was always talking about the mayor's dealings with the town's resources, mining, land deals, all that. But he never said much more than that. He was afraid of what he might uncover." Jack could feel the weight of the situation pressing in on him. He knew what it was like to uncover things people didn't want discovered, to chase a story that led to nowhere but danger. He had lived it. And now he was in it again. "I need to see the crime scene," Jack said finally, his voice steady. "If I can get to the roof, maybe I can find something the police missed." Lena didn't hesitate this time. "I'll take you. But we have to be careful. If anyone finds out we're poking around, it won't just be the mayor we have to worry about. This town, it's different." Jack had seen enough to know that when people in power had skeletons in their closets, they didn't hesitate to use violence to protect their secrets. "Let's go," he said, sliding out of the booth. As they walked out of the diner, the cold morning air hit them like a slap. but it only seemed to make things clearer. The tension in the town was palpable, thick in the air, and Jack knew they were running out of time. They reached the building where Lena's brother had been found dead. It was an old apartment complex, one of those places that had been around long enough to develop a history of neglect. The roof, as Jack had suspected, was easily accessible. Lena led him up the narrow staircase to the top floor, her footsteps echoing in the empty hall. Jack stayed a step behind, watching her closely. He could tell she was anxious, but she didn't show it. She was doing her best to stay composed, but Jack knew better. No one ever fully composed after something like this. Not when they were fighting against a system that could crush them without a second thought. They reached the rooftop door, and Lena hesitated before pushing it open. The wind hit them immediately, sharp and cold, and Jack could see why it was so easy for the police to dismiss it as an accident. From the angle of the roof, it looked like a simple slip. But Jack wasn't fooled. "This is where he fell?" Jack asked, studying the roof closely. Lena nodded. "Yeah, this is it." Jack knelt down to examine the area. There were marks on the shingles, places where something heavy had been dragged. "Your brother didn't fall here. He was brought here," Jack muttered. Lena's eyes widened as she stepped forward. "What do you mean?" "Look," Jack pointed to the edges of the roof where the marks were more visible. "These aren't the marks of someone slipping. They're the marks of someone dragging a body. Your brother was killed somewhere else, and then they brought him here and made it look like an accident." Lena's breath caught in her throat. "So you think the killer used this roof to frame him?" Jack stood, his face hardening. "Yes, but I think the killer was sloppy. There are too many details that don't add up." Lena's hands shook as she gripped the railing. Who would do something like that? Jack looked out over the town, the early morning sun barely breaking through the clouds. Someone who has a lot to lose. Someone with power. He turned back to Lena. "And I think I know who that is." The sound of footsteps echoed behind them, and Jack's eyes narrowed. He spun around, his instincts kicking in.
"Get down!"
he shouted, pushing Lena toward the roof's edge as a shot rang out. The shot rang out, echoing off the rooftops, and Jack barely had time to react. He shoved Lena down behind the edge of the roof, his body following closely behind hers as they hit the ground. "Stay down!" he hissed, his voice low but urgent. His hand gripped the cold metal of his gun as he scanned the rooftop, trying to locate where the shot had come from. Lena's breath was shallow, her body pressed against the gravel-covered roof, her eyes wide with fear. "Who the hell was that?" she whispered. Jack didn't respond immediately. He was calculating, piecing together the situation in his mind. The shot wasn't random. Someone had been waiting for them. He could feel it in the air, the palpable tension that clung to every inch of the rooftop. Slowly, he rose to a crouch, keeping his movements as quiet as possible. The footsteps from earlier had stopped, but Jack wasn't about to take any chances. He signaled for Lena to stay low and then moved toward the edge of the roof, peering around cautiously. From his vantage point, he could see the street below. There was nothing out of the ordinary. The town was still quiet, its few early risers going about their business as if nothing was wrong. Jack frowned, his gut telling him something wasn't right. Whoever had fired that shot wasn't going to let them off easy. He needed to figure out who was behind it. "We need to get out of here," Jack said, his voice tense. "Someone's watching us." Lena shook her head, her face pale. "I can't just leave. I need to know the truth about my brother. What did he find out? Why did they kill him?" Jack took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. "I understand, but you're not going to find the answers up here. We need to move. They're closing in on us." Before Lena could respond, the sound of distant engines revving reached their ears, and Jack's eyes narrowed. It wasn't just one vehicle. It was multiple. "Damn it," Jack muttered. "They're bringing reinforcements." He grabbed Lena's arm and pulled her to her feet. "We're going through the back exit. Stay close and don't make a sound." They crept toward the rooftop door, which was still slightly ajar. Jack pushed it open cautiously, peering inside. The hallway was empty, but the sound of footsteps coming from below confirmed that they were being hunted. "We don't have much time," Jack said, his voice grim. "Move." They made their way down the narrow stairs as quietly as possible, their footsteps muffled by the damp carpet. As they reached the bottom floor, the door to the building creaked open behind them. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Someone was coming. Without thinking, he shoved Lena into the closest hallway closet and squeezed in after her, praying they wouldn't be noticed. The door opened wider and Jack's breath caught in his throat. Two men walked past, talking in hushed tones. Jack's eyes flicked to Lena, her face white with fear, but she stayed silent, her body pressed against his. The men walked past them without even looking in the closet. Once the footsteps faded, Jack exhaled sharply. "Close call," he muttered. "We need to move faster." They slipped out of the building and into the alleyway, the sound of engines getting louder with each passing second. Jack glanced over at Lena, who looked like she was about to crack. "You're doing good. Stay focused. We get to the docks and then we can figure out our next move." Lena nodded, but her eyes betrayed her fear. She had no idea what they were walking into. Neither did Jack. They rounded the corner and Jack spotted a black SUV parked near the end of the alley. It was out of place and Jack's instinct screamed danger. "Stay here," he said quietly, motioning for Lena to stay put. He moved toward the SUV, his eyes scanning the surrounding area for any sign of movement. The car was empty. Jack crept around to the driver's side, peering through the window. He froze. There on the passenger seat was a folder with the word "Confidential" stamped on it. His heart raced. Whatever was inside that folder, it was important, and whoever had left it behind had just made a massive mistake. Jack reached inside and grabbed the folder, carefully pulling it out of the car. He glanced back at Lena, who was watching him intently. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Evidence," Jack said, his voice low. "This might be the break we need. But we need to get out of here, now." They turned to head toward the docks, but as they did, they heard the unmistakable sound of tires screeching against asphalt. Someone was coming. Jack cursed under his breath and grabbed Lena's hand. "Run!" They sprinted down the alley, the sound of the SUV's engine growing louder as it followed them. They turned the corner, racing toward the docks. The industrial area was deserted at this hour, but Jack didn't feel any safer. The docks were a maze of old warehouses, and Jack knew they had to keep moving. The sound of footsteps behind them grew louder. Jack knew they were getting closer. The men were gaining on them. He pushed Lena ahead of him, urging her to run faster. They reached the first warehouse, and Jack pulled open the door just enough for them to slip inside. He shut it quietly, his breath coming in ragged gasps. They waited in the dark, listening to the sounds of footsteps moving past them, too close for comfort. "That was too close," Lena whispered, her voice shaking. "Who the hell are these people?" Jack didn't answer. He didn't know. All he knew was that they were in deep and the walls were closing in fast. "We're not safe yet," Jack said. "We need to keep moving." The silence in the warehouse was deafening. Jack's breath came in shallow gasps, his hand gripping the edge of a rusted metal beam for support. Lena was crouched next to him, her eyes wide with fear, her body trembling. "What now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of their hearts. Jack glanced at her, then surveyed the area. The dim light coming from a broken window gave just enough visibility to see the abandoned crates and industrial machinery scattered around. He took a deep breath, pushing the adrenaline out of his system. They had made it this far, but they couldn't stop now. "We need to confront the mayor," Jack said, his voice low and grim. Lena's eyes shot to his, disbelief written all over her face. "You're crazy. Do you really think we can just waltz into his office and demand answers?" Jack shook his head. "I don't plan on waltzing in. but we need to hit them where it hurts. The mayor, the police chief, whoever else is involved. They're covering up something big, and your brother was killed for it." Lena clenched her fists, her eyes flashing with anger. "I want to know what happened to him. He was digging into the mayor's corrupt dealings, but I don't know what exactly he found. How do we expose this?" Jack sighed, wiping his hand across his forehead. "Your brother was onto something dangerous. I can feel it. He was digging into illegal mining operations, land grabs, and the mayor's ties with businessmen who are in bed with the criminals running this town. That folder I found, it's a key piece of the puzzle." Lena shifted uncomfortably, her mind racing. "So what do we do with the folder?" Jack's eyes hardened. "We make sure it gets into the right hands. I know someone who can get this evidence to the press. Once the public sees what's inside, there's no going back. The mayor won't be able to hide it anymore." They both stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Jack's thoughts raced. They were close, closer than ever. But with every step forward, the danger increased. The mayor's men were everywhere. They couldn't trust anyone. Lena glanced at him, her resolve hardening. "I'm with you. Whatever it takes, I want the truth. We can't let them get away with this." Jack nodded slowly, his gaze focused. "I'll contact my source, but we need to do this fast. The longer we wait, the higher the risk." He reached for his phone, but before he could dial, the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. He cursed under his breath. "They've found us. We need to move now." They turned toward the door, and as they stepped into the alley, Jack grabbed Lena's arm, pulling her into a narrow, darkened side street. "Stay quiet," he ordered. They moved quickly, their footsteps muffled by the wet pavement. But Jack knew they didn't have much time. They had to make it to the safe house. If they didn't, everything they had worked for would be lost. They reached the corner of the street, and Jack glanced around, ensuring no one was watching. He spotted a black SUV parked just ahead. It was parked too close to the curb, too perfectly. It wasn't a coincidence. "Get down!" Jack hissed, pulling Lena behind a dumpster as the vehicle's headlights blinked on. A man stepped out of the SUV, his eyes scanning the street. Jack's grip tightened around Lena's wrist, holding her still. The man walked toward the alley, his steps deliberate. Jack could feel the tension building in his muscles. They were close. Too close. The man's silhouette grew larger, but just as he was about to round the corner, Jack made his move. He grabbed Lena, pulling her further into the shadows. "We need to get inside," Jack whispered urgently. They scrambled for cover, ducking behind a nearby building. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, the sound of his own breathing too loud in the stillness of the night. "We're not safe here," Lena said, her voice shaking. Jack nodded. "I know. Let's get to the docks. Once we're there, we'll have more options. But we need to hurry." They darted from shadow to shadow, the sound of their footsteps now the only thing breaking the night's silence. As they neared the docks, Jack spotted a few figures in the distance, moving quickly through the fog. He recognized one of them. It was the mayor's chief of security. Jack's pulse quickened. "This is it," he muttered, his voice tight. "We can't afford to be seen. We need to get in and out without them noticing." Lena looked at him, her face pale, but her eyes filled with determination. "Let's do it." They reached the warehouse at the edge of the docks, where Jack had arranged to meet his contact. They slipped inside through a side door, and Jack's contact, a thin man with dark hooded eyes, was waiting for them. "You got it?" the man asked, his voice low. Jack nodded and handed over the folder. The man took it without hesitation, flipping it open briefly before tucking it under his coat. "This'll be in the press by morning," he assured them. "The mayor won't have time to clean this up." Jack exhaled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. But the job wasn't done yet. "We need to make sure the cops are involved too," Jack said. "If we don't, the mayor's men will make sure this gets buried." The man nodded. "I'll take care of it." But you two better lay low. The storm's just beginning. Jack turned to Lena, his eyes dark. We've done what we can. Now we wait. But I think we've made our move. Lena nodded slowly, but Jack could see the uncertainty in her eyes. They were still far from safe. They had exposed the truth, but they didn't know what the mayor would do in response. And Jack had a feeling things were about to get much worse before they got better. The morning air was heavy, the town still cloaked in the aftermath of the storm. Jack and Lena sat in the back of a small room at the docks, the folder with damning evidence resting between them. Outside, the world was waking up, but inside everything was tense, as though the town itself was holding its breath. The plan had been set into motion. The press had received the story, and now the final act was underway. Lena looked at Jack, her eyes still wide from everything that had happened. Are you sure about this? The mayor's men will be coming for us. Jack met her gaze, his eyes calm. They won't get to us. Not now, we've exposed them. And once the town sees what's in that folder, they won't be able to hide anymore. Lena's voice was strained but determined. But what if they do try to come after us? What if... Jack cut her off with a sharp look. We're done running, Lena. It's over. He stood up, pacing the small room, his hands clenched into fists. This isn't just about your brother anymore. It's about this entire town. The mayor has been getting away with too much, and now it's time for him to answer for it. They had done their part. The evidence was out. The mayor's criminal network was exposed. The illegal mining, the bribery, the land grabs. It was all there, in black and white. The public would see it soon enough. But Jack wasn't done yet. There was still one more thing he needed to do. The mayor and his men had been ruthless, but the real test was about to come. Jack needed to make sure they couldn't cover their tracks. He had arranged for a public meeting at the town hall, and that's where he would strike the final blow. Jack turned to Lena, his face hardening. You're going to need to be there. It's time to finish this. Lena nodded, her expression unwavering. I'm with you. I won't back down now. They left the warehouse, making their way to the town hall. The streets were quieter than usual, as if the town knew something was coming. The air was thick with anticipation. When they arrived, the doors to the town hall were already open. The mayor's office had been tipped off, but it was too late to stop the tide that was about to hit. Jack walked inside, Lena by his side. The room was full of people, and the mayor stood at the front, a smug expression on his face as he addressed the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice oozing with confidence, I assure you this town is in good hands. We've made progress, and we're going to continue making progress. The room murmured in agreement. Jack stepped forward, interrupting the mayor's speech. The room went silent as all eyes turned toward him. I'm sorry to interrupt, Jack said, his voice steady, but I think the town deserves to know the truth. The mayor's face froze, his expression turning from confident to wary. What are you talking about? Jack didn't waste time with pleasantries. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folder. This, he said, holding it up for everyone to see, is the truth. He dropped the folder onto the table with a loud thud, and as the pages spilled out, the crowd leaned in, reading the details for themselves. The mayor's eyes widened, his mask slipping for a fraction of a second. Jack watched as people around the room began to murmur in disbelief, reading the names, the dates, the documents that outlined the mayor's corruption, the illegal mining deals, the bribes, the land grabs. It was all there. The truth had finally come out. You've been lying to this town for years, Jack said, his voice cutting through the silence. You've been using your position for personal gain, and people have died because of it. You killed Lena's brother because he was getting too close to the truth, and now everyone knows. The mayor's face twisted with rage, but he couldn't hide the panic in his eyes. The damage had been done. You think this will change anything? The mayor spat. I have the police chief on my side. I own this town. Jack didn't flinch. Not anymore. Just then, the doors burst open, and several police officers filed in, led by the police chief himself. But as they entered, the crowd began to stir. People were reading the documents, and the truth was spreading like wildfire. The police chief's eyes flicked nervously between Jack and the mayor. He knew what was coming. Lena stepped forward, her voice strong. You won't get away with this. We've exposed you. The people know who you really are. The police chief hesitated, his hand twitching toward his holster, but it was too late. People in the crowd began to shout, demanding justice. The police chief tried to maintain control, but the room was spiraling out of his grasp. The mayor, realizing he had lost, turned to flee, but it was too late. The crowd had already begun to move. People were demanding his arrest. Get him! Someone shouted. The officers who had been loyal to the mayor suddenly found themselves surrounded by an angry mob. The power had shifted, and they couldn't ignore it. The mayor was dragged out of the room, his attempts to resist futile. The police chief followed closely behind, knowing his time was up as well. As the town hall erupted into chaos, Jack looked at Lena. She stood there, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and sorrow. We did it, she whispered. Jack nodded, but his gaze was already shifting toward the door. I'll be gone before the dust settles. Lena's eyes widened. You're leaving? Jack didn't answer immediately. He looked around the room, seeing the people's faces, the realization that their town would change forever. I don't belong here, he said finally. I never did. With that, he turned and walked toward the door. Lena called out to him, but Jack didn't stop. He had done what he came here to do. The truth had been exposed, and the town would never forget the man who had brought it to light. He stepped out into the cool morning air, the sun rising behind him. He had no phone, no home, and no plans. But in that moment, he knew he had done something that mattered. And that was enough.